The rain against the cheap motel window sounds like 1,000 tiny apologies, a constant weeping witness to what is happening on the bed inside. His body is a map of heat and strength above me, and the air is thick with the scent of wet asphalt and our shared breath. Every touch is a paradox, a sin that feels like salvation. My own sounds, the soft cries that escape my throat, are foreign to me, ghosts of a woman I thought had died years ago. He moves with a desperate rhythm, a hunger that mirrors my own, and in the dim, flickering light from the vacancy sign, I see not a stranger, but a rescuer. The man who carried me from the fire, now leading me into a different kind of flame. Pleasure, so sharp and blinding it's almost pain, coils deep inside my belly, a feeling I had forgotten existed, and with it, shame, cold, and heavy, because even as my body arches to meet his, the ghost of my husband's name is a prayer I cannot bring myself to speak. This is wrong, a betrayal carved into every inch of my skin he touches, yet my body betrays my mind, clinging to him, to this feeling, as if it were the very air I needed to survive. But this fire, this man, he was not the beginning of the end. The end had begun long before, in the sterile silence of a perfect life, in a beautiful house on a quiet suburban street in Oregon. My husband, Mark, is a good man. He is kind, he is stable, he is predictable. Our life together was a masterpiece of order, a quiet hum of scheduled dinners and polite goodnight kisses that never lingered. He loved me, I think, in the way one loves a valuable painting on the wall, something to be admired for its place in the home, but never truly touched, never examined in the raw, messy light of day. For 7 years, I had slowly faded into the beige walls of our life, my own desires and passions becoming so faint I could no longer remember their shape. I was a ghost at my own dinner table, starving for a spark, for a single chaotic moment that didn't fit into Mark's spreadsheets. I didn't know then that I would get my wish, that my world of quiet desperation was about to be broken open, not by a whisper, but by a roar. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, the quiet hum was shattered by the scream of a smoke alarm, and the life I knew turned to ash. It started with a smell, not of smoke, but of something electric and wrong, a sharp, chemical tang that pricked at the back of my throat. I was in my home studio, lost in the pixelated world of a new design, the quiet afternoon rain, a gentle metronome against the glass. I blamed the scent on an old power strip, or maybe the heating system kicking on. Mark was always telling me I had a paranoid sense of smell. I pushed the thought away, took a sip of lukewarm tea, and tried to refocus on the screen. But the smell persisted, growing bolder, and then it was joined by a sound, a shrill, insistent shriek that cut through the peace of the afternoon. The smoke alarm. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. It was probably just the battery, I told myself. It did this sometimes. But this time was different. The shriek wasn't lonely. It was joined by another from the hallway, then another from downstairs, a chorus of digital panic that finally jolted me to my feet. When I opened the studio door, I saw it. It wasn't just a smell anymore. It was a presence. A thick, gray haze was creeping up the staircase, a living thing, oily and silent. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It doesn't scream, not at first. It seizes your lungs and steals your thoughts, replacing them with a singular, primal command. Get out. I ran. Not towards the stairs, they were already a murky throat leading into a monster's belly, but towards the master bedroom at the end of the hall. It had a small balcony, a silly architectural feature we never used, but now it was my only hope. The smoke was thicker here, clawing at my eyes, making them stream with useless tears. Each breath was a sip of poison, hot and tasting of burning plastic and something else, something ancient and terrifying. I fumbled for the handle of the bedroom door, my fingers clumsy, my mind a blizzard of white noise. The brass knob felt hot, dangerously hot. I recoiled, a gasp of pain and fear escaping me. Trapped. I was trapped. I backed away from the door, my body hitting the opposite wall, and slid down to the floor, my legs no longer willing to support me. The smoke swirled, dancing in hypnotic, deadly patterns. It was getting darker, the light from the hallway window choked off, and the heat was intensifying, pressing in on me from all sides. I thought of Mark, at his office, in his clean, air-conditioned world, checking spreadsheets. I wondered if his last thought of me would be the polite, bloodless kiss he gave me this morning. I pulled my knees to my chest, my mind growing strangely calm, a sort of numb acceptance. This is it. This is how it ends. Not in a grand tragedy, but alone, on the upstairs landing of my own beautiful home, suffocated by my own burning memories. My lungs burned, my vision began to tunnel, and I let my head fall back against the wall, surrendering to the encroaching dark. Then, a sound, a crash from downstairs. It wasn't the sound of the fire, which had been a creeping, crackling thing. This was a sound of intent, of force, a splintering of wood, then another. Heavy, rhythmic thuds, followed by shouting, muffled and distant. Hope is a cruel, stubborn thing. Just when I thought I had let it go, it flared up again, a tiny, defiant ember in my dying consciousness. I tried to call out, but my throat was a desert of ash, and only a dry, rasping croak came out. The sounds were closer now. I could hear heavy boots on the stairs, hear the crackle of the fire reacting to a new presence. A beam of light cut through the gloom, a brilliant white sword slicing through the blackness. It swept across the ceiling, down the wall, and then it found me. It pinned me in its glare, and for a second, I could see nothing but the light. Then a shape began to form behind it, a silhouette made monstrous by the bulky gear, the helmet, the oxygen mask. It was a creature from another world, a being built for this inferno. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for his size, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. He knelt, and the world suddenly shrank to the space between us. I could hear the strange, mechanical hiss of his respirator, a steady, calm rhythm in the midst of the roaring chaos. His hands, covered in thick, scorched gloves, touched my shoulder, then my face, tilting it up. I couldn't see his features behind the mask and visor, only the reflection of my own terrified face and the orange glow of the fire behind me. But I could see his eyes, clear, focused, and impossibly calm. They held no panic, only purpose. He leaned close, his voice cutting through the hiss of his mask and the roar of the flames. It wasn't a shout, but a firm, resonant command that vibrated through my very bones. "I've got you," he said. The words were simple, but they were the most profound thing I had ever heard. They were an anchor in a sea of fire. He didn't wait for a response. One arm, thick as a tree branch, wrapped around my back, the other hooked under my knees. And then he lifted me. The sensation was surreal. One moment, I was a heap of failing flesh on the floor. The next, I was weightless, held securely against a wall of solid muscle and protective gear. I was a dead weight, a footnote in my own tragedy, but he held me as if I were something precious, something worth saving. My head fell against his chest, my cheek pressed against the rough, canvas-like material of his coat. It smelled of smoke, sweat, and something else, something clean and vital. I could feel the solid, reassuring beat of his heart through the layers of his gear, a steady drum against the frantic rhythm of my own. "Just breathe," his voice rumbled, the sound vibrating through his chest and into me. "I'm gonna get you out of here. I've got you." He said it again, "I've got you," and I clung to those words as he turned and began to move. The journey back was a blur, a nightmare painted in flashes of orange and red. I saw a beam collapse behind us, a shower of sparks raining down where we had just been. I felt the heat intensify on my exposed skin as we passed a doorway that was now a solid wall of flame. But through it all, his grip never faltered. His steps were sure, deliberate. I wasn't being rescued. I was being carried out of hell by a being who was not afraid of it. I closed my eyes, trusting him completely, surrendering my life into the arms of this stranger. The first breath of clean, cold air was a shock, a violent, beautiful agony. He laid me down on the wet grass of the front lawn, and the world came rushing back in a cacophony of sirens, shouting, and the high-pressure hiss of water hitting the house. Paramedics were suddenly there, hands on me, an oxygen mask over my face, their voices a swarm of questions I couldn't comprehend. But my eyes were locked on him. He had taken off his helmet and pulled down his mask. His face was smudged with soot, sweat carving clean rivers through the grime. He was younger than I expected, with tired lines around his eyes that spoke of things he'd seen. Our eyes met for just a moment across the chaotic lawn. He gave me a short, exhausted nod, a silent confirmation of the pact we had just made. He had saved my life. He had held me in his arms at the very edge of death. I didn't know his name. I didn't know anything about him. But in that moment, I knew that this man, this stranger, was now a permanent part of my story, a chapter I never could have imagined, etched into my memory with fire and smoke. The first few days were a blur of sterile white rooms and the smell of antiseptic. In the hospital, my world was reduced to the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft rustle of nurses' shoes. Mark was a constant, solid presence by my side, for which I knew I should be grateful. But his presence was one of logistics, not comfort. While I was still coughing up gray phlegm, my voice a raw whisper, he was already on the phone with our insurance agent, his voice a calm, efficient stream of policy numbers and legal jargon. He saw the fire as a complex problem to be solved, a series of checkboxes to be ticked. He arranged for the demolition crew, he sourced contractors, he opened a new bank account. He was rebuilding our life from the ground up, while I felt like I was still trapped in the smoldering ruins. He would hold my hand, but his eyes would be on his phone, scrolling through listings for temporary housing. He'd say, "Don't worry, Ellie, I'll handle everything." And what I heard was, "Your trauma is an inconvenience I will now manage." I knew he was trying, that this was his way of showing love, by taking control, by fixing. But he wasn't fixing me. He was just building a new, clean box around my broken pieces. We moved into that box a week later, a furnished corporate apartment on the other side of town, with beige walls, generic art, and furniture that held no memories. It was clean, quiet, and utterly soulless. It felt more foreign than a hotel. Every morning, Mark would leave for work, dressed in a crisp suit, a man with a purpose, and I would be left alone in the silence. A silence that was louder than the fire itself. The slightest sound would make me jump, the clank of the heating vent turning on, the hiss of the coffee maker, the distant wail of a siren. I'd spend hours just sitting on the unfamiliar sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at a wall. I would close my eyes, and I wasn't in the beige apartment anymore. I was back in the hallway, the heat pressing in, the smoke filling my lungs. But this time, the memory wasn't just terror, it was laced with something else. The feeling of his arms, the impossible strength that lifted me from the floor, the rumble of his voice in his chest. "I've got you." That memory became a strange sanctuary. In the cold, lonely landscape of my recovery, the thought of this nameless, faceless man was the only point of warmth. It was a secret I held in the quiet of my heart, a moment of profound connection that no one else in the world, not even my husband, could ever understand. He came on a Thursday. The rain was drumming against the window, just as it had on that first night in the motel, though that night was still an unimaginable future away. The doorbell buzzed, a harsh, alien sound in the quiet apartment. My heart leaped into my throat. Mark wasn't due home for hours, and we weren't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, my bare feet cold on the laminate flooring, and peered through the peephole. And there he was. My heart didn't just leap, it stopped. He was standing in the hallway, looking uncertain, dressed not in the bulky armor of a firefighter, but in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked smaller, more human, more real. I could see the rain clinging to his dark hair. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, and opened the door. He looked as startled as I felt. "Mrs. Henderson? Ellie? I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Liam. I was one of the firefighters at your house." His voice was different without the mask, quieter, with a slight roughness to it. I just stared at him, unable to form words. He was the man from my memories, the man whose eyes I had seen through the visor. "We do routine follow-ups sometimes," he continued, seeming to fill the awkward silence, "just to see how people are doing. Make sure they have access to any resources they need." "It's no problem, I can come back." "No," I finally managed to say, my voice still raspy. "No, please. Come in." I stepped back, holding the door open. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping inside, bringing the fresh, clean scent of rain into the sterile room. He stood awkwardly in the small entryway, his hands shoved into his pockets. He seemed to take in the generic apartment, the unpacked boxes, the thick blanket still pooled on the sofa where I had been sitting. His eyes, a deep, compassionate brown, met mine. "How are you doing?" he asked. It was the same question Mark and a dozen other people had asked me, but coming from him, it sounded different. It sounded like he actually wanted to know the answer. "I'm okay," I lied. The automatic response. I gestured towards the sofa. "Please." I went to the small kitchen to make tea, mostly to have something to do with my hands. I could feel his eyes on me as I filled the kettle. The silence was thick with everything that was unsaid, with the memory of smoke and fear that hung between us. When I came back with 2 mugs, he was sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking at his hands. It was then that I saw it. Under his fingernails, there were faint, dark lines. Soot. Stubborn, ingrained soot that even a week of scrubbing couldn't completely remove. My breath caught in my chest. A part of my home, a part of my trauma, was literally under his skin. It was the most intimate detail I had ever noticed about another person. He looked up and saw me staring at his hands. A faint flush crept up his neck. "It gets in there," he said quietly, curling his fingers into a fist. "Takes forever to get it all out." We sat there, sipping our tea. He asked about my cough, if I was having nightmares. Questions Mark had never thought to ask. I found myself telling him the truth. I told him about the silence, about the feeling of being a ghost in this new, strange place. I didn't tell him about my marriage, not in words, but I think he understood. He listened, really listened, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just nodded, his expression one of profound empathy. He noticed the way I kept pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders, even though the room wasn't cold. "The fire takes away your sense of safety," he said softly. "It takes a long time to feel warm again." He understood. In that moment, he understood me more than the man I had been married to for 7 years. He told me a little about himself, not much. He talked about the exhaustion after a big fire, the way the adrenaline leaves and a deep weariness sets in. He didn't mention a wife or a family, and I didn't ask. For that small slice of time, we were just 2 people, bound together by a single, terrifying event, existing in a bubble outside of our real lives. When he finally stood to leave, the apartment already felt emptier. "Well," he said, moving towards the door. "I'm glad to see you're okay, Ellie." It was the first time he had used my first name without my last name attached. It sounded natural. He pulled a wallet from his back pocket and took out a small card. "This is my personal number," he said, handing it to me. "If you need anything, or if you just need to talk to someone who gets it, don't hesitate." I took the card, my fingers brushing against his. A jolt, small but unmistakable, shot up my arm. It was the first spark in the kindling, the first sign of a different kind of fire. After he left, I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, the small cardboard rectangle clutched in my hand. The air in the room was different. It was charged with possibility, with a dangerous, terrifying hope. The beige walls didn't seem so suffocating anymore. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about the future. His business card sat on the generic bedside table for 3 days, a small white rectangle of potential and peril. I would pick it up, feel the sharp corners, run my thumb over the embossed fire department logo, and then put it down again, my heart hammering against my ribs. To call him felt like stepping off a cliff. It was a clear, definitive line, and on the other side lay a world I couldn't predict. My mind raced with justifications. I owed him a proper thank you, not one mumbled through an oxygen mask or in a sterile, awkward apartment visit. He saved my life. Buying him a cup of coffee was the least I could do. It was a debt of gratitude, a simple human gesture to close the loop on a traumatic event. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, necessary lie I told myself so I could hear his voice again. The truth was, his visit had disturbed the quiet misery I had settled into. He had planted a seed of warmth in the permafrost of my soul, and I was terrified it would die if I didn't tend to it. On the fourth day, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, the phone in one hand and his card in the other, my own loneliness finally giving me the courage I lacked. I dialed the number before I could lose my nerve. He answered on the second ring. Liam. His voice was just as I remembered, a low, steady sound. Hi, I began, my own voice thin and shaky. It's Ellie. Ellie Henderson. There was a pause, and for a terrifying second, I thought he wouldn't remember. Ellie, he said, and the way he spoke my name, with a quiet recognition, sent a wave of relief through me. I was just thinking about you. Is everything okay? My prepared speech about gratitude and coffee suddenly felt flimsy and transparent. Everything's fine, I said quickly. Actually, the reason I'm calling is I never properly thanked you. For everything. I was wondering if I could buy you a coffee sometime? As a thank you. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I imagined him on the other end, seeing right through my pathetic excuse. Then he said, I'd like that very much. We settled on a place downtown, a small, independent coffee shop with old brick walls and comfortable armchairs, a neutral territory far from the ghosts of my old neighborhood and the soullessness of my new one. Seeing him there, sitting in a worn leather armchair by the window, was just as jarring as seeing him on my doorstep. He wasn't the invincible creature in fireproof armor, nor the slightly awkward visitor. Here, he was just a man, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the rain streak down the glass. He wore a faded flannel shirt, and the weariness I'd seen in his eyes before seemed more pronounced in the soft light of the cafe. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine warm smile that made the lines around his eyes crinkle, and for the first time since the fire, I felt my own lips curve into something other than a polite, forced grimace. The first few minutes were clumsy. We talked about the coffee, the relentless Oregon rain, the traffic, safe, meaningless topics that served as a buffer for the real conversation humming beneath the surface. We were like two diplomats from opposing countries, circling each other, testing the waters before revealing our true intentions. The shift happened when he leaned forward, his forearms resting on the small wooden table between us, creating a more intimate space. So, he began, his voice low. How are you really doing, Ellie? Away from the insurance adjusters and the smell of new paint, the question was so direct, so perceptive, it disarmed me completely. The polite answer died on my lips. I looked down into my latte at the swirling pattern of foam and coffee, a tiny, temporary work of art. Honestly, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. Everything is new and clean and empty. Mark, my husband, he's been incredible. He's handled everything. But it's all about moving forward. He's talking about tile choices for the new kitchen, and I'm still smelling smoke when I fall asleep. I hadn't meant to say so much, to reveal the chasm that had opened between my husband and me, but with Liam, the words just came out. I feel like I'm supposed to be grateful to be alive, and I am. But most of the time, I just feel numb, like the fire burned away something inside me that I can't name. I risked a glance at him, expecting to see pity or discomfort. Instead, I saw that same profound empathy from his first visit. He wasn't looking at me like I was broken. He was looking at me like he understood. He was quiet for a long moment, stirring his black coffee with a small spoon. We have a name for it, he said, finally. It's not official, but it's what we call it. The quiet after the noise. You run on adrenaline for so long, you make 100 decisions a minute, you see things, and then you go home, and the phone doesn't ring, the siren is gone, and the silence is deafening. It's where the ghosts live. He looked out the window, but I knew he wasn't seeing the rain. Everyone calls you a hero. They see the uniform, they see the big red truck. They don't see the guy who goes home and checks the smoke alarms in his own house 3 times before he can go to bed. My wife, Sarah, she's wonderful. She tries. But she wants the husband who can build a deck and plan a vacation. She doesn't know what to do with the man who wakes up in a cold sweat because he dreamed of a floor collapsing. And there it was. The truth, laid bare on the small table between us. nestled amongst the sugar packets and coffee rings. We were the same, two people living parallel lives of quiet desperation, trapped in the expectations of others, haunted by things our partners couldn't see. He felt unseen as a man, I felt unseen as a woman. The air between us crackled with the energy of that shared recognition. It was a connection far more intimate than a touch. I told him about my work as a designer, the passion I used to have for it, and how it now felt frivolous. He told me about his father, who was also a firefighter, and the silent pressure to live up to a legacy he wasn't sure he wanted. We didn't solve anything. We didn't offer advice. We just held space for each other's secret sadness. For an hour, in that cozy coffee shop, I wasn't a traumatized victim or a disconnected wife. I was just Ellie, a woman with a story, talking to Liam, a man with his own. I felt more seen and heard in that single hour than I had in years of marriage. All too soon, he glanced at his watch, and the spell was broken. Reality intruded. He had a shift starting soon. We both stood, the awkwardness returning as we navigated the goodbye. "Thank you for the coffee, Ellie," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes this time. "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "Thank you, Liam, for everything." For a moment, I thought he might hug me or touch my arm, but he just gave a small nod and walked away, disappearing into the gray, rainy afternoon. I stayed for a while longer, watching the door he'd left through. The meeting had been innocent on the surface, a simple thank you, but we both knew it was something more. It was a confession, a communion. The debt of gratitude had been paid, but as I walked out into the cold air, a new, far more dangerous feeling had taken root. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was a deep, resonant longing. I had gone there to close a chapter, but instead, I had just written the first sentence of a new one, and I already knew, with terrifying certainty, that I would be powerless to stop myself from writing the rest. That cup of coffee was a dangerous catalyst. It legitimized our connection, cloaking it in the acceptable guise of friendship and shared trauma. After that day, we started texting. It began innocently enough. A message from him asking how I was sleeping. A message from me, sending him a link to an article I thought he'd find interesting. They were small, insignificant gestures, tiny breadcrumbs leading us down a path we both pretended not to see. But each notification that lit up my phone sent a jolt of electricity through me, a secret thrill in the monotonous silence of my days with Mark. Mark was preoccupied with the rebuild. His evenings were spent on the phone with architects and contractors, his conversation full of permits and material costs. He was building a new house, while Liam, with his quiet texts and knowing questions, was slowly, carefully rebuilding me. The day came when the demolition crew was finished, and the site was declared safe to enter. Mark asked if I wanted to go with him to salvage anything that might have survived the fire and the water damage. I said no. The thought of walking through those ruins with him, of hearing him put a price on our lost possessions and calculate depreciation, was more than I could bear. I needed to go alone, or at least, not with him. I waited a few days, until a gray, overcast afternoon, when I knew Mark would be stuck in meetings. I drove to our old street, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a skeleton, a charred, black frame standing stark against the bruised sky. The sight of it, the sheer violence of what had happened, hit me with the force of a physical blow. I sat in my car for a long time, unable to move, feeling the familiar tendrils of panic begin to coil in my chest. I couldn't do it. I couldn't face the ghosts alone. My hand, moving with a will of its own, reached for my phone. I scrolled to his name. My thumb hovered over the call button. This was different from calling about coffee. This was an admission of need. This was a plea. I pressed the button. "Ellie?" His voice was a calm anchor in my rising sea of panic. "Liam," I breathed out, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry to bother you. You said if I needed to talk." "Where are you?" he asked, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, more focused. The firefighter in him taking over. "I'm at the house," I whispered. The old house. And I don't think I can go in alone. He didn't ask why Mark wasn't with me. He didn't ask any questions at all. He just said, "Don't move. I'm 10 minutes away." He arrived in a dusty pickup truck, wearing work boots and an old faded sweatshirt. He looked solid, capable. He didn't say much, just came over to my car and opened the door. "Ready?" he asked gently. I nodded, though I wasn't. Together, we walked towards the wreckage of my life. The smell hit me first. A damp, acrid combination of wet ash, charcoal, and decay. We stepped through the space where the front door used to be, and my breath hitched in my throat. It was devastation on a scale I couldn't have imagined. The sky was visible through the collapsed roof of the living room. Rainwater pooled on the charred floorboards. Everything was coated in a uniform layer of black and gray soot. "This was the living room," I said, my voice sounding hollow and distant. "We used to have a big, ugly, comfortable sofa right there. Mark hated it." Liam just nodded, his eyes scanning the blackened ceiling joists, assessing the danger. He was my guide in this underworld, his presence the only thing keeping me from falling apart. We moved slowly, carefully, through the skeletal remains. He would point out an unsteady beam or a treacherous patch of floor. I would point out the ghosts. "That was my studio," I said, gesturing to a space that was now just a pile of melted electronics and blackened wood. I had a big window there. I could see the neighbor's maple tree. He didn't offer empty platitudes like "you can build it again, or at least you're safe." He just listened, allowing my grief the space to exist. His silence was a form of comfort Mark's endless optimism could never be. He was witnessing my loss with me, not trying to fix it. We made our way to the back of the house, to what was once our bedroom. The roof here was mostly gone, and the rain fell softly on the charred remains of our bed. It was so intimate, so profoundly sad, standing in the ruins of the most private space in my marriage with this other man. In a corner, partially sheltered by a collapsed section of wall, was a water-damaged chest of drawers. "My mother gave me that," I said numbly. Acting on instinct, Liam went over and tested it, then carefully pulled one of the drawers open. Most of the contents were a sodden, ruined mess, but tucked in the back was a small wooden box. My heart pounded as he handed it to me. The wood was warped and stained, but it was intact. I sat down on a blackened, steady-looking beam, my legs suddenly weak, and opened it. It was a box of old photographs, from the early years of my relationship with Mark. Most were fused together into a solid, pulpy brick. But on top, curled and water-stained but still recognizable, was a picture of me and Mark on our honeymoon. We were so young. I was smiling, a real, uninhibited smile, my head thrown back in laughter. He was looking at me, not at the camera, with an expression of such open, unguarded adoration. He hadn't looked at me like that in years. Seeing that tangible proof of a happiness that now felt like it belonged to two other people, was the thing that finally broke me. A sob tore its way out of my chest, a raw, guttural sound of pure loss. The grief I had been holding at bay, the grief for my house, for my youth, for the love that had faded into polite routine, it all came pouring out. The tears streamed down my face, carving clean paths through the soot I hadn't realized was on my skin. Liam was there in an instant, kneeling in front of me in the wet ash. He didn't say a word. He just took the ruined photo from my trembling hands and placed it gently beside me. Then his hand came up, not to pat my back in a comforting, brotherly way, but to gently cup the side of my face. His thumb moved, wiping away a tear, his touch impossibly tender against my skin. It was a gesture of such profound intimacy, it stole the air from my lungs. I stopped crying and looked at him, really looked at him, through my blurred vision. He wasn't the hero firefighter or the empathetic friend anymore. He was just a man, his eyes full of a deep, aching sadness that mirrored my own. He understood that I wasn't just crying for a house. He saw all of it. He saw me. The space between us, which had been filled with unspoken words and shared glances, suddenly became an unbearable vacuum, a tension that had to be broken. I don't know who moved first. Maybe I leaned into his hand, or maybe he leaned down to me. But suddenly the distance was gone. His lips met mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was frantic. It was a kiss born of grief and loneliness, and a desire so sharp it felt like pain. It tasted of rain and soot and the salt of my tears. His other hand came up, tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to ash. It was a raw, hungry claiming, a desperate attempt to find life in a place of death, to light a new fire in the embers of the old one. For a few perfect, terrible seconds, there was no mark, no wife, no ruined house. There was only the heat of his mouth on mine, the strength of his arms around me, the feeling of being utterly, completely consumed. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. We pulled apart, breathing heavily, the sound of our ragged breaths loud in the eerie quiet of the ruins. The shock hit me first, a cold wave of horror and realization. What have I done? Guilt, sharp and vicious, crashed down on me, but beneath it, a treacherous, undeniable thrill pulsed through my veins. We didn't look at each other. We couldn't. We just knelt there, in the wreckage of my old life, having just laid the foundation for the wreckage of my new one. The line had been crossed, and in the silence that followed, we both knew there was no going back. The kiss ended, but the world did not restart. We stayed there, kneeling in the wet ash, the silence between us, a living thing, charged and humming with the impossible thing we had just done. Guilt was a cold wave washing over the fire of the kiss, but the fire was stronger. I looked at his mouth, still tasting him on my own lips, a cocktail of salt and rain and sorrow. His eyes were dark, filled with a question he didn't dare to ask. I knew, in that moment, that we had a choice. We could stand up, dust ourselves off, and pretend this was a momentary lapse, a grief-stricken mistake. We could walk away and let this memory become another ghost to haunt us in our separate, lonely lives. Or we could choose the fire. I gave him my answer without a word, by the simple act of not pulling away, by the way my eyes held his, by the slight parting of my lips. It was all the permission he needed. "Not here," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't. Not here." He stood, pulling me up with him, his grip on my hand firm, possessive. He didn't let go as we walked out of the skeleton of my home, leaving the ghosts of my marriage behind us. The drive was silent, but it wasn't the awkward silence of our first meetings. This was a silence heavy with intent, with the gravity of a decision that had already been made. I watched the blurred green landscape of Oregon fly past the window of his truck, but my entire universe was contained within that small cabin. It was the scent of him, a mixture of rain, wood smoke, and man. It was the sight of his strong hands on the steering wheel, the knuckles white. It was the heat coming off his body, a palpable force that warmed me more than the truck's heater. He didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't need to. We were simply moving towards the inevitable. He took an exit off the main highway, onto a smaller road that wound through a thicket of pine trees. And then I saw it, a low-slung building with a faded sign that read the Pine Ridge Inn, its neon vacancy sign buzzing, a lonely pink beacon in the gray afternoon. It was the kind of place you only go when you don't want to be found. He pulled into the gravel lot, parked in a secluded spot at the far end, and turned off the engine. The only sound was the rhythmic tick of the windshield wipers and our shared, shallow breathing. He turned to me, his face a mask of conflict and desire. "Ellie," he said, his voice a raw plea. "Are you sure?" I answered by leaning across the console and kissing him again, a deep, searching kiss that left no room for doubt. He paid in cash. The room was on the ground floor. The click of the key in the lock was the loudest sound in the world. He pushed the door open, and we stepped inside, into our sanctuary, our sin. The room was utterly anonymous. A queen-sized bed with a questionable floral bedspread, a dark wood-paneled wall, a single lamp casting a soft, forgiving glow. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and years of secrets. He locked the deadbolt behind us, and that final, definitive click sealed us off from the world. We stood there, facing each other in the dim light, and the nervous energy of the drive transformed into a thick, palpable desire. This was real. This was happening. He moved first. He reached out, and slowly, reverently, began to unbutton my coat, his fingers brushing against the skin of my neck. My breath hitched. He slid the coat from my shoulders and let it drop to the floor. Then his hands went to the hem of my sweater. He looked into my eyes, a silent question, and I gave a small nod. He pulled it over my head, and my hair, still damp from the rain, tumbled down around my shoulders. He reached out and threaded his fingers through it, cradling the back of my head. "Your hair," he whispered, as if he'd never seen such a thing. My own hands were shaking as I reached for the buttons on his flannel shirt. My fingers felt clumsy, but I finally managed to undo them, pushing the fabric aside. I laid my palm flat against his chest. I could feel the solid muscle, the warmth of his skin, the frantic, powerful beating of his heart that matched my own. This was the chest I had been pressed against during the rescue, but now there were no layers, no uniform, nothing between us. I slid my hands up to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, then around his neck, pulling his face down to mine. Our mouths met again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the desperate, grief-stricken kiss from the ruins. This was slow, deliberate, a deep exploration. His lips were soft but firm, and he kissed me with a hunger that felt like he had been starving for years. He held my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks, and his gaze was so intense it felt like he was memorizing me, branding my image into his soul. His mouth left mine and trailed a line of fire down my throat, across my collarbone, to the delicate slope of my shoulder. A moan escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure. He unzipped my jeans, his hands sure and steady, and I kicked them off. Soon, all our clothes, all our disguises as husband and wife, lay in a heap on the floor, a discarded pile of another life. We stood before each other, vulnerable and exposed in the dim motel light. His body was exactly as I had imagined it, powerful and lean, etched with the scars and lines of a life of physical work. But it was the way he looked at me that undid me. Mark's eyes had grown accustomed to me over the years. He saw me, but he no longer looked at me. Liam looked at me as if I were the first woman he had ever seen, his eyes tracing every curve, every line, with a look of raw, undisguised worship. He led me to the bed, and we fell onto the cheap floral bedspread, a tangle of limbs and breathless sighs. He hovered over me, propped on his elbows, and just looked at me. "Beautiful," he breathed, the word, a prayer. He lowered his head and began a slow, meticulous exploration of my body. He worshipped my breasts, his mouth and hands bringing my Vong Mort to life in a way I thought I'd never feel again, sending waves of pleasure crashing through me. His hands spanned my Vong high, his palms hot on my skin, then slid down to grip my Vong Ba, pulling me tight against the hardness of his own desire. The sounds in the room were a symphony of sin and salvation. The soft sighs, the deeper moans, the whisper of skin against skin, the rhythmic creak of the old bed. Every touch was a discovery. Every kiss was a revelation. My body, which had felt like a numb, sleeping thing for so long, was now a live wire, humming with sensation, arching to meet his every move. When he finally entered me, it was not a taking, but a union. A perfect, seamless joining of two broken halves, finding a fleeting, desperate wholeness in each other. I cried out his name, and in that moment, in that cheap motel room, with the rain still beating against the window, I was completely his. After, we lay tangled in the sheets, our bodies slick with sweat, the frantic energy replaced by a heavy, languid peace. He brushed a strand of damp hair from my forehead, his touch gentle now, almost shy. We didn't speak. There were no words for what had just happened, for the chasm we had just crossed. The fire had taken my home. It had destroyed my past. Lying there, in the arms of the man who had pulled me from the flames, I knew this single act had incinerated my future. I had been saved from one fire, only to walk willingly, gratefully, into another. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I would let this one burn me to the ground. Leaving the motel was like re-entering the atmosphere from another planet. The world rushed back in, gray and mundane, the colors muted after the vivid intensity of that room. We didn't speak on the drive back to my car. There was nothing to say. We had spoken a language of skin and breath and shared desperation, and now, in the sterile light of day, words felt clumsy and inadequate. He pulled up behind my car, which was still parked on the quiet, tree-lined street across from the ruins of my home. He cut the engine. For a long moment, we just sat in the humming silence of his truck. He finally turned to me, his face etched with a pain and a tenderness that mirrored my own. "Ellie," he started, but couldn't seem to finish. I reached out and placed my fingers on his lips. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it was a mistake." He closed his eyes and leaned into my touch. "I'm not sorry," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And it wasn't a mistake. That was all I needed." I pulled my hand away, opened the door, and slipped out into the cold air, never looking back. I knew if I looked back, I might not be able to leave. And so began my life as two different women. The first woman was the one Mark saw. She was the dutiful wife, recovering from a trauma. She was quiet, a little withdrawn, but compliant. She would listen patiently as Mark detailed his latest conversation with the structural engineer. She would nod and offer a weak smile when he showed her samples of hardwood flooring, her mind a million miles away. In this life, I moved through a world of beige and gray, the color palette of our temporary apartment. The conversations were about logistics, schedules, and the slow, practical business of rebuilding. Mark's touch, when it came, was a jolt back to a reality I no longer wanted. A casual hand on my shoulder as he passed behind me, a polite kiss on the cheek before he left for work. Each touch felt like a brand, a reminder of the vows I was silently breaking every single day. The guilt was a constant low-grade fever. It was there when he did something kind, like remembering to buy the brand of yogurt I liked, a small act of thoughtfulness that felt like a hot poker to my conscience. It was there at night, lying beside his sleeping form, the scent of his familiar shampoo filling my senses, while my mind, my body, my very soul, still hummed with the memory of another man. The second woman, the real woman, lived a secret, vibrant life inside the glass screen of my phone. She came alive with a simple vibration, a specific buzz I had assigned only to him. My life with Liam was a world of pure feeling, of color and heat and light. It existed in stolen moments and coded language. Our texts were a lifeline. They started simply, "Are you okay?" he wrote the night after the motel. "No," I typed back, my heart pounding, "but I've never been better." The honesty was intoxicating. We built a world between us, one pixel at a time. We learned the rhythms of each other's days. We knew when the other would be alone. My entire existence began to revolve around these stolen communications. I would carry my phone with me everywhere, from the kitchen to the bathroom, terrified of Mark seeing a message pop up on the screen. The thrill was terrifying and addictive. A simple text from him saying, "Thinking of you," could transform a dreary, rained-out afternoon into a moment of exquisite, heart-stopping joy. I would sit across the dinner table from my husband, discussing faucet fixtures, while secretly under the table, my thumb would be caressing a photo Liam had sent me, a simple selfie of him in his truck, his eyes tired but smiling just for me. I became a masterful liar. The skill with which I could invent stories, deflect questions, and maintain a placid exterior shocked me. "You seem happier lately," Mark commented one evening, and the statement, meant as a compliment, felt like an accusation. "I guess I'm just feeling more like myself again," I replied, the lie sliding off my tongue with terrifying ease. I felt more like a stranger than ever before. The world itself seemed different. The affair sharpened my senses. The coffee I drank in the morning tasted richer. The music I listened to had more depth. The air I breathed felt crisper. It was as if I had been living in black and white, and Liam had drenched my world in vivid, saturated color. I would catch my reflection in a shop window, and for a second, I wouldn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were brighter, her cheeks had more color. There was a secret smile playing on her lips. She looked alive, she looked desired, and she looked like a woman who was capable of anything. The danger was part of the allure. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety was a necessary component of the thrill. My heart would hammer in my chest when I'd sneak out to the balcony to take a whispered phone call from him. my voice a low murmur, my ears straining for the sound of Mark's footsteps. We had one close call. I was in the living room, smiling down at a particularly daring text from Liam when Mark walked in unexpectedly. "What's so funny?" he asked, his voice startling me. I snapped my phone shut, my blood turning to ice. "Oh," I said, my mind racing. "Just a video my sister sent. A cat falling off a sofa. You know, stupid stuff." He accepted it without question, but for the rest of the evening, my hands trembled. The near miss didn't scare me away. It did the opposite. It amplified the excitement, reinforcing the precious, fragile nature of our secret world. It was a high-stakes game, and I was betting my entire life. But the rush of winning each small secret victory was too potent to resist. I was living a paradox. I was building a new self on the wreckage of my integrity. Every moment of vibrant, thrilling life with Liam was paid for with a moment of soul-crushing guilt with Mark. I was an addict. The guilt was the price of the drug, and the pleasure was so powerful, so all-consuming, that I was willing to pay it again and again. I knew on some rational level that I was playing with fire, that I was weaving a web of lies so complex it would eventually collapse and suffocate me. I was destroying the good, quiet woman I had been, the woman who honored her vows and respected her kind, decent husband. But that woman had been asleep, slowly dying of emotional neglect. This new woman, this liar, this cheat, was awake. She was terrified. She was reckless. She was consumed by guilt. But she was, for the first time in a decade, undeniably, incandescently alive. I was living two lives, separated by a wall of secrets, and the greatest lie of all was the one I told myself every single night, that I was in control, that I could manage the searing heat of my passion for Liam and the quiet, dutiful warmth of my life with Mark, and not eventually be burned to ashes by both. The secret world Liam and I had built, pixel by pixel, whisper by whisper, could only sustain us for so long. Desire is a physical thing, a phantom limb that aches for a tangible touch. The memory of our time in the motel room was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days, a promise of a pleasure so profound it had rewritten my body's chemistry. We both knew we needed more. The opportunity came on a Tuesday. Mark had to fly to Seattle for a 2-day conference. The moment he told me, a jolt of pure, illicit opportunity shot through me. The apartment, our sterile beige box, would be mine alone for 48 hours. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, after Mark had left, I found myself walking through a department store, my steps leading me to the lingerie section as if pulled by an invisible string. I ran my fingers over silk and lace, fabrics that felt like they belonged to the other Ellie, the one who lived in secret. I bought a black lace bra and matching underwear, a set so exquisitely delicate and shamelessly provocative that the old me would have blushed just looking at it. This was not an impulse buy. It was a declaration. It was armor for the woman I was becoming. The next day, I prepared for him. I cleaned the apartment, not like a housewife, but like a priestess preparing a temple. I bought a bottle of deep, red wine. I showered, and as the water cascaded over me, I imagined his hands, his mouth. I took my time, anointing my skin with scented lotion, every touch a rehearsal, and then I put on the black lace. I stood before the bathroom mirror and stared at the stranger looking back at me. The delicate fabric did little to conceal, but it did everything to adorn. It framed my breasts, making my bourgeois le contron seem fuller, heavier. It clung to my hips, the dark lace, a stark, beautiful contrast against my pale skin. This was not the body of Mark's wife. This was the body of Liam's lover. And when I covered it with a simple silk robe, I felt like I was holding the most delicious, dangerous secret in the world. He arrived just after 8. The sound of his soft knock on the door was like a detonation in the quiet apartment. I took a deep, steadying breath and opened it. He stood there, holding a single, perfect white rose, looking handsome and nervous. His eyes drank me in, lingering on the silk robe, and I knew he could feel the energy radiating from me. We didn't kiss, not at first. The anticipation was too exquisite to break. I led him inside, my hand brushing his as I took the rose from him. We sat on the sofa and drank wine, the conversation soft and low. We were savoring the prelude, drawing out the tension until it was a tangible thing. A humming wire stretched between us. Finally, he set his wine glass down, stood up, and pulled me to my feet. He led me into the bedroom, his eyes never leaving mine. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, he slowly, deliberately, untied the sash of my robe. The silk parted and fell away, pooling at my feet. He stopped breathing. His eyes widened as they took in the black lace I wore for him, and only for him. A low groan escaped his throat. "Ellie," he breathed, his voice thick with awe. "You did this. For me." It wasn't a question. He reached out, his fingertips tracing the scalloped edge of the lace on my skin, his touch sending shivers down my spine. This was not the frantic, desperate fumbling of the motel room. This was a slow, deliberate act of worship. He knelt before me, his hands sliding up my thighs, his gaze full of reverence. He pressed his face into my stomach, inhaling my scent, his breath hot against my skin. "I've dreamed of this," he murmured. "Of you. Here." He guided me to the bed, laying me down gently, and began the slow, exquisite torture of exploring me. His hands and mouth rediscovered every inch of me, but with a new confidence, a new knowledge. He knew the sensitive spot behind my ear, the place on my inner thigh that made me gasp. The desperation of our first encounter was gone, replaced by an intense focus on mutual pleasure. He took his time with my breasts, his tongue and lips driving me to the edge of madness. My quiet moans from the motel room were gone, replaced now by louder, unrestrained cries, the ting renla of a woman being thoroughly, expertly pleasured. I was no longer a passive recipient of his desire. When he moved to undress, I stopped him, pushing him gently onto his back. It was my turn. I explored his body with the same reverence, learning the hard planes of his muscles, the faint tracery of scars on his back, the way he shuddered when I kissed the sensitive skin of his stomach. I wanted all of him. My lips and tongue trailed downwards, and I took him in my mouth, loving the taste of him, the feel of his rigid length, his corbeille, a testament to his overwhelming desire for me. His hands tangled in my hair, his hips bucked, his groans a raw, masculine counterpoint to my own cries. This time, when we came together, it was a dance. We moved through different tuthé, different rhythms of passion. I was on top of him, taking control, my hips moving in a rhythm that was all my own, watching his face contort with a pleasure so intense it was almost pain. He flipped me onto my stomach, his hands gripping my bomong, entering me from behind with a raw, primal power that tapped into the deepest, most animal part of my nature. And then, we were on our sides, face to face, our legs tangled, moving in a slow, deep rhythm that was more intimate than any other act. I looked into his eyes as he moved inside me, and I saw my own desire, my own love, my own ruin, reflected there. The sounds in the room, the than, kwaduk vong, were deafening. The wet, slick sound of our bodies moving together, the sound of our ragged breaths, the unrestrained cries of pleasure that we no longer tried to stifle. The air was thick with the scent of sex and sweat, the musk of pure, unadulterated lust. This was not just about satisfying a need. This was about claiming, possessing, and branding each other, soul deep. In the aftermath, we didn't pull away. We lay tangled in my sheets, in the bed I sometimes shared with my husband, a transgression so profound it barely registered. My head was on his chest, my fingers idly tracing patterns over his heart, which was finally slowing to a normal rhythm. The guilt would come later, I knew. It was waiting in the wings, a patient monster. But in this moment, there was only a deep, sated peace, a feeling of being utterly known, completely seen, and wholly possessed. I had invited the fire into my home, and as he held me, his body warm and solid against mine, I knew I had made my choice. I no longer had two lives. I only had one, and it belonged to him. The quiet, beige world of my marriage hadn't just faded. It had been incinerated, leaving only the vibrant, terrifying, all-consuming world I had found in this man's arms. The weeks that followed our night in my apartment settled into a strange and intoxicating rhythm. The affair became a living entity, a third person in my marriage, a secret garden I tended to with meticulous care. We grew bold. The initial, frantic terror of being discovered subsided, replaced by a comfortable confidence, the arrogance of two people who believe they have created a world so perfect, so secret, that the real one cannot touch it. Our meetings were no longer confined to the anonymity of cheap motels. We found secluded hiking trails, quiet, forgotten parks, and once, a breathtaking hour in the backseat of his truck, parked at a scenic overlook high above the city lights, the windows fogged with our passion. We were masters of deception, fluent in the language of lies and half-truths. I had an excuse for every late return, every unanswered phone call, every sudden, secret smile. The danger was always there, a low hum beneath the symphony of our passion, but we had learned to dance to its tune. We felt untouchable. And that, of course, is when the world decided to remind us just how fragile our bubble truly was. The first crack came on a quiet Wednesday evening. Mark and I were in the kitchen of the temporary apartment. He was cooking, something he rarely did, a gesture of domestic peace that filled me with a familiar, dull ache of guilt. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone, ostensibly looking at recipes. My phone was a minefield, a digital testament to my infidelity, and I had become an expert at navigating it. But I was complacent. A text message banner flashed across the top of my screen, and for a split second, the world went into slow motion. It was from Liam. And it wasn't one of his usual coded messages. It said, "I can still taste you on my lips." My blood turned to ice. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through. Mark was right there, not 3 feet away, stirring a sauce on the stove. "Something good?" he asked casually, his back still to me. I fumbled the phone, nearly dropping it, my fingers suddenly slick and useless. "No," I stammered, my voice sounding strangled. "Just, my sister. She's an idiot." I swiped the notification away, my thumb shaking, and shoved the phone into my pocket as if it were on fire. Mark turned around, a ladle in his hand. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, a high, unnatural sound. "Just remembering a stupid fight we had as kids." "It's nothing." He looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable, his brow furrowed with a flicker of something. Concern? Suspicion? I couldn't tell. Then he shrugged and turned back to the stove. "Well, dinner's almost ready," he said, and just like that, the moment passed. He hadn't seen it. The bullet had missed. The wave of relief that washed over me was so intense it left me dizzy. I leaned heavily against the counter, my legs trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sheer stupid luck of it was staggering. But as the terror subsided, something else took its place. A wild, electric thrill. We had almost been caught. I had stared into the abyss of discovery, and I had gotten away with it. Later that night, I texted Liam, my fingers flying across the screen. "You have to be more careful." Mark almost saw. His reply was instant. "I'm sorry. I just can't stop thinking about you. The risk is making me crazy." Reading his words, I realized the risk was making me crazy too. It wasn't a deterrent. It was an intoxicant. The second crack was far more severe. It shattered our illusion of control completely. A few days later, we were in his truck again, parked in a secluded spot by the river. The rain was coming down in sheets, enclosing us in a private, percussive world. The desperation was back, a hunger to reaffirm our connection after the scare. We were in the back seat, a tangle of limbs and frantic kisses, my clothes half undone. It was heated, primal, a frantic attempt to lose ourselves in each other, and then it happened. A cheerful, jarringly upbeat ringtone cut through the passionate silence. We both froze. His phone, which he'd tossed on the front seat, was lit up, illuminating the dark cab with a ghostly blue light. On the screen was a smiling picture of a blonde woman, and a name that felt like a punch to my gut. Sarah, his wife. The spell was not just broken, it was annihilated. The passion evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, sordid reality. I scrambled off him, pulling my shirt down, feeling suddenly naked and cheap. He cursed under his breath, lunging for the phone. "I thought I put it on silent," he muttered, his face pale. He swiped to answer, and in the space of a single second, he transformed. The passionate, desperate lover was gone, replaced by a calm, reassuring husband. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced lie. "Yeah, everything's okay. Just helping Dave with a flat tire down on the industrial road. It's taking longer than I thought." I sat there in the dark, silent and invisible, listening to him lie to his wife. I listened to him talk about what they would have for dinner, asked if their daughter had finished her homework. Each word was a small, sharp cut. He was so good at it. As good as I was. The ultimate betrayal wasn't that he was cheating on her with me, it was that he was performing for her, a seamless, effortless performance of a life in which I did not exist. He ended the call with, "I'll be home as soon as I can, love you too." That last part, the "love you too," landed with the force of a physical blow. It echoed in the small space, a confirmation of my true status. I was the other woman, the dirty secret in the backseat of a truck. After he hung up, the silence was thick with shame and anger. He turned to me, his face a mask of misery and guilt. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. Don't..." I cut him off, my voice cold and hard. "Don't you dare." I couldn't look at him. I just stared out at the rain, at the dark, swirling water of the river. "So that's it, isn't it?" I said, my voice shaking with a rage that surprised me. She calls, and I just cease to exist? I become a flat tire on an industrial road? What was I supposed to do? He shot back, his own voice rising in frustration. Tell her I'm in the back seat with my mistress? Ruin both our lives right then and there? For the first time, we were fighting. The ugly reality of our situation, the reality we had so successfully ignored, was now sitting between us, cold and undeniable. The argument dissolved as quickly as it had begun, leaving us exhausted and miserable. We were not enemies. We were partners in this crime, trapped in the same cage of our own making. He reached for me then, and I didn't pull away. The shared fear, the shared guilt, the sheer, sordid mess of it all pulled us back together. The kiss that followed was not tender. It was angry and desperate and punishing. It was a kiss that sought to blot out the world, to erase the sound of his wife's name. The passion that ignited between us was fueled by the adrenaline of the near miss, a fierce, almost violent need to reclaim our stolen territory. The danger hadn't pushed us apart. It had fused us together, in the most toxic, exhilarating way imaginable. We had survived, but the illusion of our perfect, secret world was gone forever. We both knew now that we were living on borrowed time, and the clock was ticking, louder than ever. The near misses changed the very texture of the affair. The careless, joyful confidence we had built was gone, shattered by the stark reality of a wife's name on a phone screen and the terror of an almost read text. The thrill, once a pure, exhilarating high, was now cut with a constant, bitter anxiety. Our secret world, once a vibrant sanctuary, now felt like a besieged fortress, with the walls closing in. The danger was no longer a tantalizing spice. It was the poison seeping into everything. Our texts became more cautious, our calls shorter, fraught with a new tension. The easy intimacy was replaced by a kind of shared desperation, the grim camaraderie of two soldiers hunkered down in a trench, knowing the battle was already lost. We were both constantly looking over our shoulders, starting at shadows, living with a knot of fear permanently lodged in our stomachs. The affair was no longer an escape from my life. It had become the most stressful part of it. We needed to see each other. It wasn't born from the same buoyant desire as before. It was a darker compulsion, a need to physically reconnect, to prove that the magic hadn't been completely extinguished by the cold wash of reality. We needed to feel the heat to remember why we were risking the flames. By unspoken agreement, we chose the Pine Ridge Inn. It was a pilgrimage back to the site of our first real sin, a desperate attempt to recapture the raw, untainted passion of that first afternoon. But as I drove there, the familiar thrill was absent, replaced by a hollow sense of dread. I felt like I was driving to a final goodbye, not a lover's tryst. The buzzing pink neon of the vacancy sign, once a beacon of secret hope, now just looked cheap and sad. He was already in the room when I arrived, standing by the window, staring out at the parking lot. He didn't smile when I walked in. He just turned, and the look on his face was one of such profound weariness and sorrow that my heart ached. The vibrant, confident man who had worshipped my body in my own bed was gone. In his place was a tired, defeated soldier, weighed down by the consequences of a war he had willingly waged. We didn't speak. There were no words that could bridge the chasm of guilt and fear that had opened between us. He simply closed the distance and pulled me into his arms, his embrace not tender but crushingly tight, as if he were trying to physically fuse us together, to make one whole person out of our two broken halves. His kiss was hard, demanding, almost punishing. It wasn't a kiss of seduction. It was an act of desperation, a frantic attempt to erase the past few weeks, to silence the screaming doubts in our minds with the brute force of physical sensation. What followed was not lovemaking. It was a battle. A beautiful, brutal battle against the inevitable end. We tore at each other's clothes, our movements frantic and clumsy, driven by a need that was more about possession than pleasure. He took me against the door, his hands gripping my hips with a bruising force, his body moving against mine with a fierce, almost angry rhythm. He was claiming me, marking me, defying the world that sought to tear us apart. I met his ferocity with my own, my nails digging into the hard muscles of his back, my legs wrapped around him, pulling him deeper. We were two drowning people clinging to each other for survival, believing our shared passion was a life raft, not realizing it was the very anchor pulling us down. We moved to the bed, our bodies crashing together, the worn-out springs of the mattress groaning in protest. Our movements were a frantic race against time, a desperate, sweaty attempt to outrun the truth. Every thrust, every gasp, was a way to stop thinking, to exist only in the raw, overwhelming reality of the physical moment. My cries were different this time. The pure, clear notes of ecstasy from our previous encounters were gone. In their place was a sound I didn't recognize, a broken, keening wail that was equal parts pleasure and pain. It was the sound of a heart breaking even as the body found a fleeting, shattering release. I was grieving for us, for the loss of the beautiful, simple thing we once had, even as his body moved within mine. I was mourning the death of our affair in the very act of its consummation. The climax, when it came, was not a gentle release. It was a violent, shuddering crash, a moment of oblivion so complete it felt like a small death. It was the end of the battle, and as our bodies quieted, the silence that rushed into the room was absolute and terrifying. There was no peaceful afterglow, no whispered endearments or gentle caresses. He rolled off me immediately, turning his back to me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I lay on my back, staring at the familiar water stains on the ceiling, a profound and hollow emptiness spreading through my chest. The silence in that room was louder than any argument. It screamed with the names of our spouses, Mark and Sarah. It howled with the truth of our cowardice. It mocked the futility of what we had just done. We had used our bodies as a shield, a weapon to fight off the impending end. And now, with our bodies spent and quiet, our minds were defenseless. The truth was there, sitting between us on the cheap polyester bedspread, cold and immovable. It was over. The affair, our vibrant, life-altering escape, had become a cage, and the energy we once spent on passion was now spent just trying to breathe. I could feel his guilt radiating off him in waves. He was thinking of his wife, his daughter, the life he was betraying. I was thinking of the silence that awaited me at home, and the even greater silence that would follow when he was gone from my life completely. We were lying side by side, inches apart, but we had never been further away from each other. Eventually, he sat up and started to get dressed, his movements stiff and mechanical. I did the same, the simple act of pulling on my clothes, feeling like I was putting my chains back on. At the door, he stopped and turned to look at me, and his eyes were filled with a sorrow so deep it was a mirror of my own. He reached out and touched my cheek, a ghost of his former tenderness. "Be safe, Ellie," he said, his voice hoarse. That was it. Not "I'll call you," not "I'll miss you." Be safe. It was a benediction. It was a dismissal. It was a goodbye. I watched from the window as his truck pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared down the road. The room, which had once been our sacred haven, now felt cheap, sordid, and suffocating. It was a tomb, filled with the ghost of a dead love. I realized then that we hadn't chased the end away. We had only confirmed its arrival. The affair was no longer my source of life. It had become my slow, beautiful, and now excruciatingly painful death. The goodbye at the motel was not an end, but the beginning of a new kind of torture, the torture of silence. In the aftermath of our previous encounters, the silence had been a breathless pause, a space filled with the humming anticipation of the next text, the next call. But after that final, desperate meeting, the silence was a dead weight. It was a void, an absence so profound it became a physical presence in the room with me. The first day, I told myself he was just busy, that he needed space. The second day, I began my obsessive vigil over my phone, my stomach churning with every notification that wasn't from him. By the third day, a cold, hard dread had settled in my bones. The vibrant secret world we had built together was going dark, and I was powerless to stop it. Liam began to fade from my life, not in a dramatic storm, but like a photograph left out in the sun. The passionate, poetic paragraphs he used to write were replaced by short, perfunctory messages that appeared after days of silence. Hope you're having a good week. Thinking of you. They were ghosts of the intimacy we once shared, polite, meaningless phrases that felt more painful than no contact at all. I tried to call him once, my desperation overriding my pride. He answered, but his voice was distant, tired. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling, "what's happening to us?" There was a long pause, and I could hear the sounds of a family in the background, a child laughing, a television playing. The sounds of the life I had tried so hard to pretend didn't exist. "I can't do this, Ellie," he said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth I so desperately needed. "I look at my daughter. I look at Sarah. The guilt is eating me alive. We were a mistake. A mistake. That one word negated everything. The rescue, the coffee, the motel room, the whispered confessions. It was all reduced to a simple, sordid mistake. The affair, which had once been my thrilling refuge from a life of quiet numbness, had now become the primary source of my anxiety. My life with Mark, once a cage of polite boredom, now felt like a different kind of prison, one where I had to perform the role of a loving wife, while my heart was being systematically ripped from my chest. The lies became heavier, no longer the thrilling tools of a secret agent, but the back-breaking burdens of a condemned woman. My disconnection from Mark was no longer just a lack of passion, it was a complete emotional amputation. He would come home, full of news about the rebuild, his face alight with excitement, and I would look at him as if through a thick wall of glass. He was a kind man, a good man, my husband, and I felt nothing for him but a vast, hollow ache and the acidic taste of my own deceit. One evening, he came home with a blueprint, spreading it out on the dinner table. "Look," he said, his finger tracing the lines. "This is your new studio. It has a huge north-facing window, just like you always wanted. For the light." It was the most thoughtful gesture, a detail he had remembered from years ago, from a time when I still shared my dreams with him. It was a gift of love, and it felt like a dagger in my heart. I should have been thrilled. I should have kissed him. Instead, I just stared at the drawing, at the neat lines that represented a future I could no longer imagine, and I felt a flicker of something ugly and irrational, resentment. I was angry at him for his goodness, for his patience, for his utter, maddening obliviousness. I was furious that he was not the man who was currently destroying me. "That's nice, Mark," I said, my voice a monotone. "Thank you." I walked out of the room, leaving him standing there with his blueprint, a confused, hurt look on his face. My world shrank to the 4 beige walls of the apartment and the glowing screen of my phone. I was trapped in a feedback loop of misery. The anxiety from Liam's silence made me unable to connect with Mark, and the guilt from my coldness towards Mark sent me scrambling back to my phone, praying for a word from Liam that would make it all better. But the word never came. The escape had become the prison. I had longed for feeling, for passion, for something to break the monotony, and now I was drowning in a sea of emotions so vast and painful that all I wanted was to go back to the numb, quiet peace I had once despised. I had become a ghost, haunting the edges of two different lives, belonging in neither. The final, definitive nail was hammered into the coffin of our affair a week later. After 5 days of complete, unbroken silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to his fire station. I told myself I just needed to see him, to have one last conversation, to find some kind of closure. It was a lie. I was a desperate addict, seeking one last fix. I saw his truck in the parking lot, and I waited, my heart a frantic, fluttering bird in my chest. When his shift ended, he walked out with a group of other firefighters, laughing at some shared joke. He looked happy. He looked free. My presence there, sitting in my car like a stalker, was a dark cloud in his clear sky. He saw me. The laughter died on his lips. His face hardened. He said something to his friends and walked over to my car, his stride weary and reluctant. I rolled down the window. "What are you doing here, Ellie?" he asked, his voice low and cold. "I needed to see you," I whispered. "We need to talk." "No," he said, shaking his head, not even looking at me, his eyes fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. "There's nothing left to talk about. We said everything in that motel room. This has to stop. It's over." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and walked away, getting into his truck without a backward glance. Over. The word hung in the air, absolute and final. 2 weeks later, Mark came home and announced the new house was ready. We spent the weekend moving our new furniture, our unblemished possessions, into the pristine, sun-filled rooms. Mark was ecstatic, a man reborn, his home and his life rebuilt from the ashes. He saw the house as a symbol of our resilience, our fresh start. I saw it as a beautifully constructed mausoleum. On the last day, after everything was unpacked, Mark found me standing in the middle of my new studio. The light from the huge north-facing window was brilliant, just as he'd promised. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "We're home, Ellie," he whispered into my hair. "We made it. Everything is going to be perfect now." I leaned back against him, a hollow doll in my husband's arms, and looked out the window. The house was perfect. My life was perfect. And I was more alone, more trapped, and more broken than I had been when I was choking on smoke in the ruins of my old life. The firefighter had saved me from the fire. It was true. But he had walked away, leaving me to burn in a much quieter and far more terrible flame. Months have passed. 6 of them. Autumn has arrived, painting the Oregon landscape in strokes of gold and rust. Our new house, the one born from ash and insurance money, no longer smells of fresh paint and new carpet. It smells like us. It smells like Mark's coffee in the morning and the lavender-scented soap I use. It smells like home. From the outside, our life is a portrait of recovery, of resilience. The good, kind husband and his quiet, grateful wife, having survived a tragedy and emerged stronger. It is a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. The truth is, this house is not a home. It is a museum of a life I am no longer living, and I am its lonely, silent curator. The affair is over. It did not end with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful goodbye. It simply stopped, like a heart that quietly gives out in the night. After he drove away from the motel, the silence from his end was absolute. There were no more texts, no more calls. I was erased. The vibrant, secret world we built had been dismantled, leaving no trace behind except for the profound and permanent damage it had done to my own. The ghost of Liam, however, is a relentless occupant of this new house. He is in the silence between my conversations with Mark. He is in the sudden, frantic beat of my heart when I hear a distant siren. He is in the scent of rain on hot asphalt. I was at the grocery store last month, pushing my cart down an aisle, when I saw him. He was with a woman, his wife, Sarah, and a little girl with his dark, serious eyes. He was laughing, a real, unguarded laugh, as his daughter put a box of sugary cereal in their cart. Sarah touched the small of his back, a casual, familiar gesture of ownership. He did not see me. I was just another anonymous woman in the store. I fled, leaving my half-full cart in the middle of the aisle, and I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, parked on the side of a road, my body shaking with a grief so intense it felt like the first day all over again. Seeing him like that, happy and whole in the life he had chosen to protect, was the final, brutal confirmation. He had gone home. He had repaired his world. I was just collateral damage. My life with Mark has settled into a new kind of quiet. It is not the comfortable, passionless quiet of before. It is the tense, fragile quiet of a ceasefire. He treats me with a careful, gentle kindness, the way one handles something precious and broken. He attributes my silences, my listlessness, my inability to feel joy, to the trauma of the fire. He believes he is living with a woman who is still healing from a near-death experience, and in a way, he is right. He just doesn't know that the event that nearly killed me wasn't the fire, but the affair. He doesn't know that the man who broke me wasn't a cruel stranger, but the very hero he, too, had thanked for saving his wife's life. Sometimes, I look at him as he reads the paper or watches television, and a wave of pity so profound it makes me nauseous washes over me. Pity for this good man who has no idea his marriage is a phantom limb, a thing he can still feel that is no longer truly there. Pity for myself, for the woman who has to carry this terrible secret, this corrosive knowledge, for the rest of her life. I have thought about leaving. I have played the scene in my mind 1,000 times. I pack a bag, I write a letter, I confess everything, burn his world to the ground just as mine was, and I walk away. But where would I go? The affair did not empower me. It did not make me stronger. It hollowed me out, scooping out my courage and my conviction, and leaving behind only weakness and guilt. I don't have the strength to detonate another life, especially not the life of a man whose only crime was his inability to see that his wife was slowly fading away. And so I stay. I am paralyzed by my own cowardice, trapped in the beautiful prison Mark has built for me, a life sentence for a crime he doesn't even know I committed. I spend most of my days in my new studio. The light is perfect, just as Mark promised. It streams in through the huge north-facing window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It is the perfect room for an artist. But my canvases are blank. My design tablet is dark. The fire that Liam ignited in me was supposed to have fueled my creativity, my passion for life. But when he extinguished our affair, he took all the color with him. He left me in this perfect, sterile room, with perfect light and a soul that is completely, utterly devoid of inspiration. He saved my body, but he torched my spirit. And so this is my life now, a quiet performance of normalcy. I am the woman who was saved from a fire. I am a survivor. That is my story. But as I sit here, in the silent, sun-drenched tomb of my new life, I ask myself the questions that have become the litany of my existence. What was the real fire? The one that consumed a house? Or the one that consumed a heart? He pulled me from the flames and breathed life back into my lungs, but the life he gave me was a borrowed one, a temporary one, and its absence is a deeper kind of suffocation. What, then, is the true cost of being saved? And in the end, when the smoke cleared and the hero went home, was I saved at all? Or was I just moved from one burning building to another and left to burn alone forever?